test. Okay. Let each other. Okay, I think we'll get started. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. You braved that crazy snow that happened. Certainly not, I don't know, I didn't expect it to be quite that much. So thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. I know this is going to be a very enlightening and informative conversation, and I want to thank all of our panelists also for braving the elements and coming here, and to our speakers who are in our pulpit today, Gavin and Ben, thank you very much. I'm going to start with some introductions of who our panelists are today, and I'll be asking a few questions at the forefront to kind of get the ball rolling, and then we'll be turning the mic over to you folks. So be thinking if you have some burning questions that you'd like getting some answers to. This panel has a wealth of knowledge and experience in our community and in and around issues of homelessness and housing scarcity and a lot of the challenges that our community is going through right now. So I'm very happy to have all of you here. And I'm going to start with some introductions. So I guess I'm starting from the middle because that's how I have it written here. But we've got Amy Manning. And Amy and I worked together at Transitions very recently, but Amy has worked in housing and homeless services for the last 22 years. She is currently working at Camp Hope as the housing director for the Right of Way project for Spokane low-income housing. This position is coordinating housing referrals and services for the people living on the Department of Transportation right-of-way land. And before that, she was Director of Housing Services at Transition. She oversaw housing programs, TLC, Miriam's House, Home Yard Cottages, and services at Cinto Commons. She's also worked at St. Vincent de Paul in North Idaho, Habitat for Humanity, and the YWCA in Missoula. She has worked in 3 states in homeless services. She volunteers for the Peace and Justice Action League and Spokane Alliance, so many of you here may already know Amy. She studied government and women's studies at EWU, currently lives in West Central with her partner Ken, youngest son Indiana, and 2 cats and a dog. And she has experienced poverty, housing insecurity, and homelessness as a child and a young adult. And this experience is at the center of her commitment to housing and economic justice. Welcome, Amy. And next we have Kebi Ali. She has participated in programs at Transitions Women's Hearth. She is currently active as a participant advisory committee member for Transitions. And Kebi has incredible insight and knowledge of what it takes to navigate complicated systems on the journey to find safe and affordable housing. And she has provided encouragement and a lot of positivity to many other women facing challenges at the Women's Hearth. I know for a fact because I have visited with Kebi many times and witnessed that support that she gives to women. So thank you for being here, Kebi. And next we have Megan Curran. Megan Curran experienced homelessness for several years before she found housing through Transitions in 2014. While living at Transitions, she was able to access supportive services in Spokane, such as Frontier Behavioral Health, YFA Outpatient Treatment, and Lutheran Community Services, where she acquired the tools she needed to successfully exit homelessness. And since 2014, Megan has worked as Director of Operations for Food Services at Skillskin, as Director of Operations at Spokane Falls Recovery Center, and currently as Program Director for Permanent Supportive Housing at Transitions. I will also say she was also the assistant program director under me at Women's Hearth, so I enjoyed working with Megan very much. She is committed to helping solve homelessness in Spokane, especially for women and children. And we've already heard the introduction for Ben and Gavin, so hopefully you remember what was said about them. But I'd like to get started. Kind of focusing a little bit on the program side, services side of things, because we have such a wealth of observational knowledge and experiential knowledge in the room. So my first question to the panel, and anybody can jump in, you've all worked with many folks trying to transition from being unhoused and into permanent housing at your various programs. What are some of the pieces that need to fall into place for someone to get to a successful housing outcome?
For me, coming out of homelessness was just basic determination. I couldn't stay on the streets. It didn't work with my mental health. But I noticed with other people, we need to, give them encouragement, because some people don't want to do the work, or they can't do the work to get out of the streets. And I think that's the main thing that the homeless need to do. You got to work to get housing. There's things you need to do. You have to be on top of it. And I think that that's a barrier that we have, because I talk to the women at Women's Hearth, and a lot of them just don't want to do the work, or they say it's too hard, or I've recommended people to housing there, and sometimes they don't take the service, and sometimes they do.
I think a lot of the time, being homeless is a huge challenge, and it keeps us back, and the expectation is down. There's also a limited opportunity, so many people are ready to be housed, and there's no housing available, so they have to kind of keep checking in and keep trying. They often have to go through a lot of no's before they get yeses, so they're told that all of their barriers are keeping them from doing this, but the biggest barrier for them to moving on and whatever the other stuff that they have to do is housing. So it's in this catch-22 where folks can't quite get to the spot. Also, our services are all over the place. So if somebody needs to be in treatment, we don't have enough treatment beds. If they need to go into treatment before they go into housing, there's just so many steps to it that it's pretty overwhelming for folks. So the biggest thing that I think is people that get back up, people that have that get back upness, it's in them, and then community support that just keeps encouraging and being there and helping guide the way. So those community connections, the more folks have, the more successful they are.
Thank you. Can you name those of you, who have seen folks kind of get from point A to point B, or for yourself getting from point A to point B to housing? Could you identify some of the most helpful resources you found in our community? And where are the strengths that you see in Spokane?
I worked with Women's Hearth when I was homeless in 2018. They helped me I got denied for my first apartment, and they helped me appeal it because I should have got denied. And so at the time, Patty was working there, so she helped me do my appeal. I was able to get my apartment, and I've been in it since 2018. I've been in there. And then again, Women's Hearth helped me get my Section 8 because I'm on a fixed income and I'm low income. And so they helped me get my Section 8. I worked with Hope House when I was homeless. I stayed at Hope House. They were so helpful. They gave a safe place to lay your head, And it was a great, it was not, I was homeless, but it was a really good experience for me to stay there and get the support that I needed.
I think we're seeing a little bit of a shift too on traditional case management to peer support case management, and I think that's really important. And with that, I'll just turn it back to people with lived experience, because we have to listen to those that have lived experience if we want to fix the systems.
Yeah, I think that programs that are more flexible, that look at case management in different ways, Women's Hearth is a good example. I think that the way that we've put our systems together, not just in Spokane, but in general, people are disconnected. And so being connectors, looking at case management or peer support as connecting people, and not everybody fits, not everybody's homeless journey is the same. I think that those resources that we have that are more flexible, like Women's Hearth, and I can't think, I always call it Safe Place because I did the work in Coeur d'Alene, but it's not. It's, what is the youth outreach? Crosswalk, thank you. Crosswalk's also a good example of like kind of meeting people where they're at and making sure that like they have somewhere to kind of check in when they're really struggling, so.
And one term we use a lot in this line of work is low barrier. In my opinion, a city that has a blend of both low barrier services and high barrier services is the best approach, because some people do better in a high barrier type service where sobriety is a requirement to access those services. But Spokane is doing a great job of making sure that we provide enough low barrier services to bring people into housing. So compassionate addiction treatment, or CAT, is a very low barrier access to mental health and support for substance use disorder. Hope House is another excellent example of safe shelter for women and those who identify as female or non-binary, to be able to have that safe space. For me, through my journey, I was given opportunities at housing over and over. This was prior to coming to Spokane, and I failed every time because they were high barrier, and they had this expectation that the minute I enter housing, I have to meet all of these conditions and requirements, and I just wasn't able to do that. And so it wasn't until I came to Spokane and was offered housing through transitions that had really robust case management support, and I was also able to access treatment in the community and counseling and things like that, that for me, I was able to finally exit homelessness.
Another great organization is Peer Spokane. They offer support and job placement, housing, peer support. I'm actually a recovery coach there, and I have my own coach that I meet with and helps me every week. I meet here once a week, and if I have anything to talk about, she's there. They have been a great support to me. I volunteer there and I go there often, and it's just a great organization that helps people.
Thank you. You've all touched a little bit on the people connection and how important that is. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how important you see connecting to a sense of belonging, finding community, peer support. What's the role that plays, and how does that help people connect to resources?
I mean, I think it's essential. I think there are some folks who can do it alone and go it alone, but those are the exceptions. Most of us need community and need people. Nobody gets anywhere alone. When my family lost our house to a house fire when I was 12, we were outside of Missoula, and my mom was a single mom, and she had 3 kids. And the ability for us to put things back together was that the community sent us, like they saved silverware and brought bunk beds and really helped us like kind of start back again. And that community element, not just in times of like crisis like a house fire or being on the streets, but that sense of community and belonging that we also get to give back. That, I mean, I didn't think at 12 I would be doing housing for the rest of my life, but obviously that experience was really central to the work that I do. So I get to give back. My sense of community is not just in being helped to get back up when we were down, but also to understanding that all of us fall sometimes and that we need to get back up. And that give and take and people having a sense of service to each other and that we belong to each other is central to like recovery in any kind of crisis.
Yeah, for me, when I was experiencing homelessness, I think isolation is a very adequate word to describe that experience. Even though I was around people and had sort of my social peers, I felt very isolated and disconnected. And when I came into transitions, I was living in their transitional program called Miriam's House. Amy was the director, and one of their values is community, and one of the things that they did at Miriam's House is the women eat dinner together every night, Monday through Friday. And that was a shock to my system. It had been so long since I had, sat at a table with other women and sort of had this civilized, yes, the goal is civilized, conversation for 30 minutes and then doing dishes and preparing the meal together. All those steps of community for me, that's where I'd been through so many services before where community is not at the core of the design, essentially. It's just to like make sure people have the basics. But bringing that intangible sense of community into the service is where I finally was able to drop my walls and start healing, because I personally believe that we all heal the best in community.
Thank you. Okay, I have one more question for the group from me, and then we'll open it up to you folks. This is more of a kind of a structural, systemic question, but you had a magic wand. Can you think about two important systemic changes that could happen in Spokane that would make a difference for helping people transition from being unsheltered to sheltered and permanent housing? You think of two major things that would help in that direction.
Well, I think one, we need to look at like the correlation between rising rents and increase in homelessness, and then look at all the other separating, like if we talk about, just to take this back to community, because I think it's really important, in like, we've lost our sense of community, but that's also a structural problem, and that's how we build our societies since the 1950s, based on a car culture where we just get in a car and go from place to place to place, and so we don't walk anywhere, we don't see our neighbors, we don't see them as part of our community, and then we've separated ourselves by income stratas so that you're just around people of the same socioeconomic status. So like, I would have mixed income neighborhoods everywhere, and a lot of it would include a lot of density to keep rents down, so then we wouldn't see an increase in homelessness, and then I would pour all of our money into low-income housing and services. If we want to get people off, that are currently on the streets off the streets, we have to provide housing, and those levels of housing need to be different than just 40-unit apartment buildings. They need to include, if you've been living in a tent, you may need a transitional tiny home for a while. You need then permanent supportive housing, but you might need to have housing that has less services as well. But we need to hit it. I think if you had two things, you'd have a lot of density to drive down housing prices and rents, and then you'd have a lot more low-income housing.
I would do away with credit checks and change the structure on how people can buy property. Just as a singular example, I'm a homeowner by luck. I work really hard, I do. I put in crazy hours and I've worked my butt off. I was a single mom for a long time, but I know lots of people that have worked very hard that are not able to come into home ownership. And the process of homeownership only happened for me because I was able to get an aunt to co-sign, and the people directly sold me the property. And now my property is like 100,000 more than what my mortgage was in like 4 years. And that is nonsense. Like, there's nobody who is like me that came up the way that I did that is going to be a homeowner, and that process is nonsense. It doesn't count you being able to pay rent. It doesn't count you any of the other things. Also, I had to have co-signers from the time that I was 21 until I was 35 because I had medical bills that went into collection and people would not rent to me without a co-signer. And I had good rental history. I was never evicted. I paid my rent. All of that stuff. That is also keeping people out of housing. Credit checks are for poor people. Rich people do not have bad credit. Well, maybe some, like Trump, but most people who have bad credit are poor, and like, you are cutting that whole group out of housing by saying you have to have a 620 credit score. Like, it's ridiculous.
My magic wand would definitely be to increase the amount of housing in Spokane for people who are ready to exit homelessness. When I was ready, I was fortunate in that those services were there and present, and the timing worked. But so often, it's very difficult when the waiting period might be 2 years, and there's no movement. We just need a lot more low-income housing in Spokane. And then I think the other magic wand for me would be to increase accessibility to transportation. So oftentimes when somebody is ready to exit homelessness, even with low barrier services, there's so many steps and so many hoops to go through that it requires a lot of coordination across the city. They have to access services at this nonprofit and at this nonprofit. If they have zero income, it's very difficult to be able to hop on a bus sometimes and make it to appointments. If somebody's staying at the Trent Track Shelter, which is located quite a ways from downtown, how are they expected to get back and forth each day? And so just for people who are low income or have no income, making transportation more accessible.
My magic wand would be, because it takes so long to get housing, and because we're in a housing crisis right now and we don't have housing, I would build a day center. Where I'm from, there's a day center. It's called Ministry with Community, and they have washers, they have showers, they feed the homeless twice a day. And it's not just for the homeless. I used to do my laundry there. I would sign up for laundry, take my cart, and wheel it down to Ministry with Community and do my laundry. I think that's the biggest thing that the homeless need. They need laundry facilities. They need shower facilities. That would raise their self-esteem and kind of guide them in the right direction, because who doesn't want to shower? And then they don't have clean clothes. They go to City Gate. They sign up for clothing. The lady gives them, time to get clothing. They get clothing. They throw what they have away on, and then they got another outfit. That's just waste. I think we just really need to look into those facilities.
Thank you. One more.
And I think, these are all individual problems with the system, and they're all really valid. And so how do you come up with a way to respond to all these needs? You have complexity of the system that people can't even access what's there because there's a lot there, but accessing it is a real problem, super complex and difficult to access. You have shortages. You have shortages of housing. You have shortages of rentals. You have shortages of services in general. You have a lot of gaps in the services. And so you have all these myriad one-off situations that are preventing people from accessing what they need to address situations. And also, it's obviously borne out in the broader statistics of rising homelessness in the community. So you can attack them one by one organizationally, and there's so many great organizations doing heroic things to address all the things that are being brought up right now. But obviously, in the bigger picture, we're not succeeding. Our homelessness is up about 65% over the last 10 years. The system's being overrun. So how do you address that? Is, in my view, you create an umbrella organization, and this is what we've seen in a few places across the country, is you have an umbrella organization that ties it all together. So that when you need resources, when you need more money, that you look to the entire system and you have the ability to raise money. So if, for instance, we identified that we needed a 1/10 sales tax, because is this a problem in our community? I think everybody agrees it is. So it rise to that level of priority, and say that was about $10 million a year. Say, wow, that kind of puts a small dent in a few things that we're addressing, but not nearly quickly enough. But then you turn to another part of the city organization. In the first place, with the 1/10, you've got to get it passed by the legislature, the local body, the mayor and the city council. But you also then have to take that $10 million that you're pulling in and accelerate it. And I worked together on a couple of these things where we could go 15 times. You could loan against that and monetize it. And we have an internal lending program at the city, and that could turn it into $150 million overnight. But you can't do that if you don't have access to the leadership at the city, the county, the valley, and your state legislature. Sometimes you're going to need special provisions. So you're not going to have that access. And you might need help from the businesses, because sometimes businesses, leadership at, say, Washington Trust Bank, Spokesman Review, Avista, some of our larger institutions, pressure on the politicians to help them understand the significance of a particular initiative. And if they're on board and they're writing in and saying, hey, we want to see this 1/10 sales tax or whatever the very provision might be, and if the community is obviously raising their voice in the same fashion, and all the organizations and individuals running these organizations are on the same page, then you get that kind of action. But you need an organization that ties all that together. We need an umbrella organization that brings it all together, makes sure that they're all working off the same plan, that they're all working in the same direction, that it's coordinated. Imagine if all of us decided to build an addition to this church. And we could either each of us, like everybody go to a corner of the room, find a spot, and come up with your plan and execute it. But you're not allowed to talk to anybody else in the room. And imagine what that addition would look like, as opposed to, we're going to get everybody together, kind of pool our resources, pool our understanding, come up with a shared plan, and coordinate it, and go forward. It would be up overnight. But that's what we're lacking, and it's not for lack of effort, it's not for lack of expertise. And strangely, as a CFO of the city for 18 years, it's not a lack of resources. The resources are there, but it is a lack of coordination and a centralized organization that can help coordinate all this activity. And we have, for instance, a continuum of care. Dale Brees just finished chairing this for an extended period of time that has a really great plan, and has been making great plans about how to address homelessness in Spokane. They need a champion, centralized organization to help carry that out. Right now, they have a lead organization, the City of Spokane, which, by the way, the City of Spokane has 53 departments, 13 divisions, 2 major utilities, a criminal justice system that would blow up anybody's comprehension of any system, and somehow they're supposed to keep track of homelessness. So even now, on Monday, the city, along with the county and the valley, will sign a statement saying we need to look at getting this out of the city and into a central organization where it can be truly responsive and help leverage the heroic efforts, again, of these organizations, and in particular the continuum of care that's been doing all this planning. They need a lead organization that can lead, and that's what we're working on now.
Thank you. Okay, I think it's time to open it up for questions. I'm going to hand off the mic to Karen.
Thank you. My background is urban regional planning, as some of you know. And one of the things that I see as a possible barrier is actually zoning regulations that will allow some of this, anything from a tiny home to just a small cabin that takes the place of a tent. I know we have accessory dwelling unit regulations that allow that in the city, but that's still not the same as whatever the zoning regulations would require. Can you guys address what needs to be done and where we are with regard to that?
So we're working at Camp Hope on a tiny home solution right now for the last of the individuals that are at the camp, and it's probably about 40 that have severe co-occurring disorders, and housing options aren't going to work. There needs to be some transitional option. The city went and visited both the planning director, the economic development director, and the building official. Went and visited Mercer Timber with me a week and a half ago to look at their modular homes that can act as tiny homes and then eventually be permanent housing because they're built with a more permanent structure. Amy also traveled to Seattle a week and a half ago or so, or a week ago, to look at their tiny homes there. I think the city definitely recognizes, Spencer, who's the planning director, said straight up that in general commercial, under his interpretation, anything's allowed in general commercial. And so I think especially if you use a structure that that passes the building inspection versus some of the tiny homes, pallet homes that are being developed are fire dangers, and the fire department fire marshal gets angry at anything. And so if you use the right material and you use the right zoning, I think the city is about there to straight up say you can have tiny homes in general commercial zoning. I don't think the barriers are as big as we think they are.
I think the largest challenge is NIMBYism. There are ways to do tiny homes through churches and other places too throughout their mission that sort of like bypass some of the zoning pieces. I don't know what the code is, but I spoke with Mary at Commerce, and she was saying that like if churches want to do some of this work, they could potentially do that as an extension of their mission. But the bigger issue is with people don't want poor people in their neighborhood messing with their property values. Like that has been the argument, the resistance, the challenge for so many of the things, and we see it with Catalyst, and we saw it at Homeyard Cottages, which if you've driven in that neighborhood in Audubon, they're beautiful. They look great. They look better than a lot of the neighborhood, and people were mad, super mad about it. So I think zoning is less of a challenge than the NIMBYism.
Just mention, I think that will change. I mean, I think the most letters the city council ever got on something, or one of the most, was when what's the restaurant there on Northwest Boulevard, the Flying Goat? Yeah, they went ballistic on the Flying Goat, and it's new. Change is really hard. So the idea of having a restaurant, right next to you in a parking lot, and people parking possibly in front of your house, is something new in Spokane. We see it a lot, of course, in places like the Hawthorne neighborhood in Portland or all through Seattle, whatever. And it's going to be, I think there will be a learning curve, and it's this huge, NIMBYism is a huge problem. But I'll also mention the city owns over half the real estate in the city of Spokane. The city of Spokane. We have a lot of opportunities to help out with pocket pieces of real estate that are not in the beaten path. I can think of one in particular behind Albee, for instance, where there's no neighbors. And it's close to good transportation, it's close to downtown. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, but again, everybody has to get in the room and share these ideas and these values and break down the natural tendency to be NIMBY. We can't get mad at people about NIMBYism because it's everywhere you go. It's part of human nature. We can. We're all mad.
Other questions from the audience? Julie.
What happened with the attempts in the past when you had multiple services at, for instance, the library, or I think there was a service center that was planned to have all kinds of available help for people that were houseless. What happened with those?
So I believe I know the the services that you're talking about. The resource center was the one where all the different services were going to sort of have a representative, or the knowledge was going to be concentrated. And that is up and thriving. That's doing very well. It's located where WorkSource is. And you can also call 211, which I call all day long, every day, pretty much as a case manager. And they're very, very knowledgeable people who answer the phone and can get individuals quickly connected to the services that they need. And if they don't know the answer, they always are willing to do the research. So the Resource Center is doing great. The libraries, I'm not as familiar with their services, but they offer community court every Monday. The pandemic, I think, put a little bit of a dent in that, but it's back up and running in person, where if you are in the district criminal justice system, you can come to community court on Mondays, and there are representatives from different agencies who can connect you to various services. So those things are happening, and they're effective.
Not enough, and not in as many neighborhoods as we need for people, but like, yeah, what they're doing is good. But we need more. People are stuck in different places because they have to hide away, because they can't legally be homeless, like on the streets. And so people end up in camping in spaces, not like Camp Hope is there and we have resources there, but there are many other encampments that people are in, and our shelters are very full. And so just like Megan was talking about earlier with transportation, people are camping outside of those systems. And so if we had more, like, I know you're talking about centralized, but I think for like services and stuff like that, if we had more neighborhood-based services, like, we would be doing better, and that would encourage people to like volunteer in neighborhoods, and also just have a sense of community for the people. There's a lot of talk about the people at Camp Hope and people who are homeless not being from Spokane, which isn't true. And also, who cares if you're homeless? Where are you from? So, so yeah, that's what's happening with the.
I think, to reiterate what was said earlier, was no matter how many services we have in different places, there are missing services. And I think we just need to thinking about laundry. We need to thinking about showers. And then the other one I haven't heard mentioned is storage. Like, if you're trying to get on your feet and you have to go to the doctor or a therapist or some training programs or something, and you have a cart full of items, what do you do with it? You have to have a storage facility, and a lot of people have figured this one out, and that needs to be overcome. The storage situation needs to be dealt with right away.
Thanks. We want to respect your time, of course. We probably have about 10 more minutes, and I know there's a couple more questions from the audience.
Hi. So let's say an organization had identified a piece of property owned by the city. How would they go about contacting someone in the city of Spokane to figure out if they could use that property, buy that property, lease that property? I'm thinking of one specifically off 2nd that would be maybe perfect for like a permanent community, but also there's an organization in Colville called Hope Street. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they have this thing called the Rest Stop, which is similar to what Kevy described. They have laundry and they have showers, but laundry, showers, and storage is a thing that we think is super important, because like you said, if you have an appointment and now you're clean and you have clean clothes, but where do you put all your stuff for the day? If there was a building in the city of Spokane, commercial, that we could use for such an endeavor, who do you contact?
So it's such a wonderful question. There's a real estate person at the city of Spokane, and so you could contact that individual, or you could contact one of the city council members, or you could contact the mayor's office, or you could possibly, I'm trying to think who else you might contact. But the funny thing about every one of those contacts is the city council isn't really talking to the mayor right now. So it has to go through the mayor and the city, and the real estate person works for the mayor. So even if the real estate person, who's up to his eyeballs in other projects, just keeping up with the day-to-day, very unlikely it would leave the real estate person's desk to ever get to the mayor's office, but suppose it did. It wouldn't help much because it has to go through the city council ultimately, and there's not much conversation going on there. And so the point is, I mean, I would keep an eye on it and keep working on it, but until we get this central organization, because when we get the central organization, you're leveraging so much more because they're going to know your story, what you're trying to accomplish with your organization, and how it fits within the broader framework of the homelessness response system in Spokane. And so when that person then is interacting with City Hall, that voice is heard because that CEO of the new organization or one of the people working with that CEO, they're connected to downtown, for instance, Hello for Good, which is about 100 business organizations, Downtown Spokane Partnership, GSI, which is our old Chamber of Commerce, et cetera, and you're leveraging all that. But they also have a great relationship with our state legislators. We have the Senate Majority Leader, Andy Billigan, a lot of very influential, we're at a very good place right now in the state legislature, we're well positioned. You're also going to have great connections with presumably the mayor's office and the individual council members and the Board of County Commissioners, because they also have a lot of real estate, and even the Spokane Valley and hopefully the outlying areas. One phone call from that individual or somebody in that organization is going to get some answers. But I think Dale has a question. Oh, yeah. So it's coming, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's pretty darn difficult right now because they have so much going on. Yeah, you've probably experienced it.
Okay, we have Barb and then Dale.
So my question is, I know a lot of people that are having housing crisis have disabilities, like physical disabilities, can't shower themselves, can't walk well enough to cook or go to the grocery store. And I just don't even understand how they live on the street. But how can we serve them? Like, I know personally, many of them live at Sacred Heart for months, if years, waiting for
not access to the care that they need. I think if you're asking about how to serve people, if you're connected with them, I think everything is based in relationship and rapport and trust. Nobody wants to be seen as a project or as somebody who isn't capable. American standards and what we've told people for however long before I was here, is that you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you don't need any help and self-sufficiency and all that stuff. So people who are already struggling and seen as a failure of this system are gonna have a hard time when people come in and tell them that they need all of this extra oversight and help and assistance. But as we meet people where they're at and we engage with them just like we would want to be engaged with, and getting to know them and understand more of what the barrier is for them accepting help, if I'm understanding the question right. It's relationship and rapport and trust, because I don't want to, I've shared some of my trauma and challenges, but I don't want to share every mistake that I've ever made with you all. You seem like lovely people, but I just don't want to do that.
I just want to kind of add to that, the visibility piece of homelessness. So oftentimes, what we see that's visible in front of us is the people standing on street corners asking for change, and it's very natural and understanding that becomes our working understanding and definition of what a person is who's experiencing homelessness, that's the representative population. And the truth is, every time you see somebody standing outside on a street corner, I don't have the numbers, but there are a wealth of other people who are not visible experiencing homelessness, and they're hiding away from humanity for very understandable reasons. They may be in hospitals, shelters, they may be staying in abandoned houses or couch surfing, week to week with friends. That makes up the majority of the homeless population that we have here in Spokane, and I think it's very easy and natural to sort of unconsciously develop that stereotype, and it's easy also to say the people standing here, if they wanted housing, they could have it because we can see the housing, it's visible, and we see the person who's not in the housing, and we say that must be a choice. And the truth is that person who's standing there may be on 10 different wait lists or 15 different wait lists for a number of years. And so I think kind of just actively working against developing that stereotype and remembering that when we do see people experiencing homelessness, they're one, and there are many, many more behind that are not visible.
All right, we have a final question from the audience, from Dale.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And just to clear up, I think about the question about WorkSource. WorkSource Envision Center was initially out of WorkSource money. And so they had limited for homelessness, even though it was marketed in our community as a heavy assessment place, or that they would maybe fix 30% of our homeless issues. And so, yet I'm encouraged about the regional conversation, and I just served my 5 years on the Continuum of Care Board, and how we can do better in our community, and how do we stay in the conversation of having the complete picture of what entities can actually support homelessness. I'm here because I think faith-based has a place at the table in this conversation because it takes some healing nature that's going to help us along this. And in my tenure of 38 years within our community, public health connected, I work as a peer navigator for public health. Yet, how do we initiate the change that we need with the business community and the leadership of our communities? Because they are part of, and I'm not picking on people, but they are embedded with NIMBYism themselves. And because the conversation should come from ground up, the fix should. Okay? And that's my only, really concern is that we need the lived experience piece, which I can represent myself years ago. Yet how do we really get that survey underway of the complexity of life and what can throw us into homelessness? Because it is so complex, it can happen in a second in many different ways. And I'm really encouraged, though, that the conversation is here within a faith-based organization, because I think that's what we've been missing, actually, is somebody can hold that stature of the social healing, peacemaking coming out of the pandemic that we were under. And so that's a challenge, Gavin, and I keep challenging you, okay, to really listen and look at that, because it's like no one does that well. I've sat in business meetings, and it's like to hear the stigma of somebody disabled from business leaders, that actually breeds homelessness. Okay, so faith-based, how do we language it? I'm looking at, but yet how do we language it? How do we approach it in a loving, healing way? Because any of us can be vulnerable in our journey of life. Okay, I respect that with the disability myself. And it's like, which breath could be my last breath? So I really watch my approach. That's why I'm so engaged in my community, because I know the lack of pharmaceuticals could take us out, the expense of pharmaceuticals. Recently went up in our community, another 55 and older housing complex on the South Hill transferred from 55 and older housing to general market. And I have questions about that, and I know Ben would like to know more about that, but yet it's like, wait a minute, how did that happen? Because that's part of the science of keeping a pace with it all. So thank you for hosting.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more? Okay. Yes, okay.
Do you have any suggestions of what we as individual people or our church can do?
You know, Dale just brought up a lot of great points, but one of them was just the input, because when we're forming this new regional organization, we want to get politics out of the decision making, of the politics in the bad way. We're also talking about a ton of solutions that need politics and politicians and their support. So the governance of this new organization is going to be really critical. It's this really fine balance. So how do you put people like Amy or Megan or Kebby, who, as I'm listening, I'm just going, wow. And Ben with his at Slick, they're all subject matter experts. And Dale and the rest of the people in this room that work there, how do you leverage their knowledge and expertise and put it in the seat, but have and the politicians and all the other leadership parts of this community lean that happen, to leverage these ideas and this understanding. And that's the next 90 days. After we sign this joint statement, we're going to have 90 days of what we're calling a due diligence period. But right here, we have resources, everybody's pitching in. So if the Unitarian Church here, if you decided to hold a community meeting, very much like you're doing now, and invite the community in and have this kind of conversation, we can bring in the people to help keep track of that Q&A, to keep track of the responses, to put it on our website, and to make sure it's leveraged into the conversation about what this, this regional formation will look like. So Dale's warnings and repeated warnings that, yeah, regional collaborative sounds great, but the devil is in the details. And so you could all be a part of this dialogue to make sure those details are gotten right. And we would love, as the people that are helping to facilitate this process, to be there listening and not talking like I am right now.
I think organizing is at the center of all of the things that has been lost on community. So you all have this community that you gather already, you have relationship with one another. The Spokane Alliance is a great organization to do some of that organizing if this is an issue that you want to take on. I think that we are much stronger together in this, and we alone, like we've been talking about, like things being spread out and not being able to be accessed, but you have the ability and community here that you can organize behind this issue and push it in the way that your community here can make sure that those politicians, business members, are accountable to those things, because people who have power don't always understand the impact that they have. They're in a different seat, they're with a different lens, and when you bring things to them, then they can't say they don't know anymore. So I think that there are places to put people in the hot seat that know and are making these choices. I think there are places to educate people who don't know and have just had a lot of privilege and don't understand what the situation in our community really is. And I think that you all together probably have more than you think you do sitting in these seats.
Preach, Amy.
Yeah. May I make a comment? We have a great county commissioner who are going now. I've been in meetings. They're very approachable. There's 2 minutes. Well, it's actually 3 minutes. Take 2 minutes to start the meeting. People get up there and stand and talk. I've been to 4 of them now. Every time I go there, Tuesday at 2 o'clock, Public Works Building, which is just castle. And it's exciting to be there. Usually there's 2 of us who are not on somebody's staff. Here they can watch it virtually, but there's something about those 5 seeing us. And if you see Al, I'm telling everyone he's a good guy and very approachable. He really laughed. But we have an amazing thing going on now. Talk politics. Some organizations can't speak, but kind of like Amber and Chris are the same 2 people, loving everybody. And there's Mary.
it is a big opportunity right now in the county that we have not had.
All right. Thank you. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add one more thing you can do on an individual level as we look into the future and Spokane continues to expand low-income housing in different neighborhoods. You can join your neighborhood city council. Is that the
Neighborhood council?
Neighborhood council. Thank you, and really be a voice of promotion and advocacy if there's a project that's potentially being developed in your community, to be on the side of educating your neighbors, so to speak.
Those are hard meetings. Bring friends.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, I just can't thank all of you enough. Let's give them a round of applause for being here. You've all given us some wonderful ideas, and I think some motivation to use our strengths and really put attention to this issue. This church has been full of doers for many, many, many years, and I just appreciate your guidance and your information and examples for us. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for attending today.